Hi, my name is Marguerite, and I work at Northern Spy Records based in Brooklyn, New York. And in partnership with Record Store Day, on July 17th, Northern Spy is going to be putting out the first ever vinyl of the Thai Elephant Orchestra, which is an ensemble of Thai elephants at a conservation center in northern Thailand. The co-founder, Dave Soldier, is going to be meeting with me today to answer some questions on what the orchestra is all about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Margot, tell me how you think of New York City and particularly where we are right now on the Hudson River. This area is really interesting historically.
That's right.
The first opera house was a few blocks from here.
Really?
Yeah.
And I feel like you can still feel the current of it. Obviously, people talk about the energy of New York, but...
Yeah. So a lot of the music comes from here. American popular music comes from here.
So I am curious a little bit. You are, and I'm going to brag on you briefly.
I'm already embarrassed.
But you're a neuroscientist. Mm-hmm. You're a professor at Columbia.
Correct.
In neuroscience.
Yep.
And you're a musician yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You have worked with some of my personal heroes, like David Byrne.
Okay.
And you worked with Kurt Vonnegut, did I
I
read that?
did. I have
That's unreal.
2 operas with Kurt Vonnegut.
That
and
is crazy.
He's on the recordings.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you've also gotten acclaim specifically even for the Thai Elephant from National Geographic, New York Times, BBC, NPR.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm glad you reminded me.
It goes without saying.
We were on Jon Stewart. I remember
really?
that. Yeah.
That actually might be.
We were I was a moment of zen. In Thailand, when you ride elephants, you put your legs on either side of the neck.
The neck, yeah.
And so they had a picture of me doing that. I don't know, maybe conducting the orchestra or some damn thing.
Wow.
So it was a moment of zen.
That is, you were in the Guinness World Record for the
heaviest
animal
orchestra.
Yeah. How many tons?
I don't know. I have to work it out, but we figured out. But what I do remember is the equivalent in weight of 3 Berlin Philharmonics.
Wow.
Yeah, it's wild. So I was in Thailand on New Year's Eve 2000.
Gotcha.
And a few days later, when we built our first instruments.
That happened so quickly, and so Richard Lair is the other co-founder with you.
That's right.
Okay. Did you meet him in New York?
No. Richard has lived in Thailand for at least 40 years. We have a mutual friend who speaks Thai named Lindsay Emery. Lindsay was working with a couple of Russian painters named Komar and Melamid, and they had this idea to teach elephants to paint. So since Lindsay could speak Thai, she brought them to Thailand to Richard Lair's center. It's the first conservation center for elephants anywhere, really, or anywhere in Asia. So Lindsay went over there with Komar and Melamid. The elephants can be trained to paint in a few minutes. He came back in 1999. It was the first time he'd been back for 19 years. We became buddies and we listened to music, and he told me, elephants like music. So we came up with the idea that maybe if we built instruments that they could play easily, that they would. So he invited me there. I went with Lindsay, her now husband, Neil Budzinski, who did the front cover, a filmmaker named Kurt Ossenfort, a recording engineer, a friend of mine that I've worked forever with, named Rory Young, runs Acme Studios in Mamaroneck. He set up a portable studio in the forest, and a couple of other artists. There's a fellow named Don Ritter, who does sound installations, and Ken Butler, who's an instrument maker. And eventually there were 16 elephants who could play musical instruments.
And I had read that it's not just random noise that the elephants are necessarily responding to, that you actually had put one of the instruments out of tune on purpose, and they avoided that?
I did that once, yeah. The elephants learn by themselves within a minute or two. Nobody's telling them that. Hit it here. What Richard calls the sweet spot, but it's the spot that sings. So what sounds good to us sounds good to them too.
Wow. So how, just in your diverse background, how would you say now, working especially in neuroscience, coming from the lab,
sure.
How did your interest in neuroscience tie into some of this?
That's a tough question. It goes into other projects, but thank you for asking. So a lot of the projects I do these days put science and music together. with Brad Garton, who runs the Columbia Computer Music Center. We have a project called the Brainwave Music Project, where we have musicians wear EEG headbands that translate their brainwaves into music, and at the same time they improvise with themselves. I'm putting together a project where Johannes Kepler, who discovered, right. So Kepler discovered that the planets move in ellipses in a book about music.
Really?
Yeah, I know that it sounds strange, but it's really true. And it's called The Harmony of the Worlds. And he said what the music ought to be for the harmony of the worlds. And so we're going to try to realize that. And we could go into how he did this, and it's absolutely fascinating, but it would take 5 minutes. You would absolutely understand all the math and everything. Kepler composed this piece 400 years ago. It's never been performed the way that he said. So, that's related to, I suppose, music and science. And then a lot of stuff that's just pure music.
I mean, it does call into consideration the existential nature of even this project specifically. I mean, music for me and why I work in the music industry is something incredibly meaningful.
Yeah, it's all greed, I know.
Yeah. So, and that's something even at Northern Spy we talk about a lot. Why are we doing what we do? And
why does so much humanity do it?
Yeah.
And you know how many artists are listed on Spotify?
Oh.
6 million. This means that and most musicians are not listed on Spotify.
Sure.
There's millions, tens of millions of people making their music at any given time.
Yeah.
It's just astonishing how important it is to us.
And how universal. I mean, I can't really think of anything in the world, across languages, clearly. And now...
Across species.
Exactly.
Whales and birds, yeah.
That's crazy. And
elephant orchestras.
I hate to even use the word a soul, that's for lack of a better word, but it does make you wonder about, this kind of deeper connected sense of things between all living things.
Sure.
Did you find that it was meaningful in that way, this project?
Are you kidding? I wish I could quote the godfather of soul, James Brown, or the queen of soul, Aretha Franklin. I don't know, there's so many great quotes about soul in music. Yeah, of course you do. And elephants are playing music, but they have their own vocalizations. Does that sound like music to them? I think so. I understand as a biologist, it's hard to define soul, but it's also impossible so far to define consciousness, and that hasn't stopped neuroscience and philosophers from writing long, empty books about it.
Right.
So we might as well write them about soul. And I'm not being entirely facetious when I say we should ask Aretha Franklin and James Brown and Ray Charles. Not at all.
I agree completely. Those guys seem like some of the better philosophers
Certainly.
of our generation. Now, you're talking about basically the span of time as it ties into what sort of constitutes a soul in a living being. And as far as timeless goes, I am particularly partial to vinyl. And it's worth noting, I mentioned at the beginning that this has been, the Thai Elephant Orchestra has been out. It's been digital, but this is the first time ever that it's been made on vinyl.
Right, and so it will outlast the CDs.
Yes, and I have one, your copy here. We did send one to Richard in Thailand, and
Good.
I have
It
one
will get
for
there
you.
in about a year.
Yeah, that's right. We're hoping, we're tracking it.
Hi, Richard. I hope your LP showed up. Oh, very good. Thank you so much.
See ya. That's
Yep.
the deal.
So
That's
this
all
was a
yours.
photograph by Neil Budzinski
Yes, it's
in
beautiful.
2000, and this was probably around 2006. So that's Richard Lair. There's me, and these are the various mahouts. A couple of them are very special for the music project, but the one I will point out over here is Bunyang. You can hear Bunyang doing. He's also a priest of the religion there. It's an amalgam of Buddhism, Hindu, which of course is related to Buddhism anyway, and their ancient animist religions, worship of forest spirits, forefathers, things like that. And it's so he's a priest of the Lana religion. So he sings a prayer to the elephants while they're improvising. And in some way, I think there's all sorts of beautiful music the elephants have made, but to me that's particularly profound. I have a good friend who is an Egyptologist, and particularly she can read hieroglyphs right off the wall. I went with her to the Met, to the Egyptian wing.
I was just there the other day.
Yeah. And she's reading and said, "Can you read this one?" She said, "Oh, this one's boring. Here, let me read this one over here." And I said, "Rita, how old is this papyri?" It's 5,000. It's at least 5,000 years old. I said, I can't read anything on floppy disks from 20, but it's worse than that. I can't read stuff like on jump drives from 5 years ago. And she can read stuff that's 5,000 years old.
That's beautiful.
So thank you for putting on something that that people can hear in the future.
I hope so, and I hope it sounds better. I think I'm also partial.
Well, I
to
certainly
the
hope so.
Vinyl in that way too.
Yeah, with a good needle,
Yes,
things can sound pretty
that's
good.
correct. And so the big thing coming up, July 17th, is Record Store Day, but you are obviously getting it hot off the press here ahead of time. So you could give it a spin.
Yeah, there's a "Be careful of elephants." Elephants cross here.
Oh, that's
sign.
awesome.
Because this is in a clearing where we recorded most of the music.
And what are some of these instruments that are on there?
Well, this is a renat. I was telling you about it. These are in the Thai pentatonic scale. This gong is made from an illegal saw. So there were some guys in the teak forest who were illegally cutting down the woods, and they got chased and they left their saw. So and I didn't do this, these are some of the people working at the center, sanded off all the jagged parts and made it into a gong. Let's see, what else can I show you here? This is, I believe, made from a giant hubcap from an enormous truck. Altogether we made about 40, or tried about 40 different instruments.
Wow.
A small number of them were store-bought, especially harmonicas.
Yeah, they could just pick those up, right?
Yeah.
That's so cool.
They kind of enjoy playing the harmonica. And they'll walk around playing the harmonicas in their trunk, and they'll hold them up to their own ear. This is Poon. This is a young version of Poon. This is Poon's Mahao. This Poon was, I believe, 6 years old here. For several years was our star. Did several solos every day. And they wouldn't have to ask him. Just that. And he'd go over and improvise a solo. And then decide when to stop. One of those solos is on one of our recordings, and I've transcribed it for human piano player. And it makes a pretty nice piece.
There could be a debate about whether it's music or not, and then you could do a blind study on that and whether, listen to it. And that's definitely music.
That's what we do. We call it the modified Turing test. We did a premiere for it with a big orchestra, and we didn't tell people who wrote it. And at the end, I got up and say, "Okay, now you have to guess the composer." And people said Lou Harrison, Aaron Copland, John Cage, blah, blah, blah. And he said, "No, it's elephants."
That's so awesome.
It's note for note. It's what the elephants play. It's a big question for us and for people I work with. Mostly we have meetings and try to figure out how to advance the cause of cross-species. It's how we can start to understand other animals better. Elephants are completely, if you grew up with dog, cats, cattle, our domesticated animals, you can't imagine elephants. Mahouts told me, look, an elephant is like, to them, is like a 6-year-old kid, to them.
Yeah.
In other ways, the elephants are more mature than we are. But, for stuff humans want to teach them, they think of them as, they're that level of intelligence.
Absolutely. And there seems to be in a lot of those cultures, much more of a reverence and a respect for those.
Of course, they're around it.
Yeah.
If you're around elephants, you respect them. So yeah, we have a lot to learn. We're kind of morons for all that we can build all this stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So much to learn, including music. So,
Yep.
Dave, thank you so much.
Thank you, Margot.
This was
Thank you,
such a
Greg.
joy.
It's a pleasure.
It really was.
จะในวันนี้ก็เป็นวันเดียวเป็นวันใจญาติที่สีใสบ่สาวตามแต่ก้าวเงาประเพณีผู้ข้าก็จักมาเรียกร้องเอา32 วันจังมงคล